Today I'm going to walk you through how you can turn your very important spreadsheets into animated graphs in only a few minutes with this free motion design software Cavalry. And the thing is, you can customize this to honestly anything you want, from a very simple animation to a more professional and complex animation. But before we can do all of this, we need to design our graph. So let's jump into Cavalry. And the first thing we can do is add our rectangle, which we can do by holding Alt and then pressing this. Now here you can honestly select any color you want. I'm going to use this from the Alice color palette. And then changing the height, you can see it changes from the middle and not the bottom. So we need to add a deformer called Align. And if you want to know how this works, I got a video on that. Links in the description. Now we need to select a Y value of 1 for this, since if we try to select both the rectangle and the align shape at the same time, we can see that by changing the Y value, you can see the pivot point is changing, and we want it at the bottom since we want it scaling up from that point. So once you've done that, we can go back into the rectangle, and before actually moving on to the dynamics of this graph, we can change the corner radius mode to individual, and here we can add a bit of bevel on the corners. For this I want a bit of top radius both on the left and the right side. Around 30 is good for this, but you can obviously customize this however you want, and now you can see it works. So before we can move on to actually changing this according to our spreadsheet, we need to first of all move the object down, and then we can add this little baseline, which is going to indicate where the graphs is going to start from. And as with the styling of the actual graph itself, this is very personal preference, and you can really just change it to whatever you want. But once you're happy, you can go ahead and change the length to something that fits the size of the final result. For this, I'm going to use a length of 1000, and then we can go into the stroke and then change the cap style to round. And now move it down to -350 as with the other element. Now, before we can use our spreadsheet data to control this H value of the bar, we need to somehow duplicate this. And for that, we can add a duplicator by selecting the rectangle shape, and then up in the corner, select this duplicator. And now with this duplicator, we can go into the distribution mode and change it to linear, and then change the size to reveal that we have now 3 instances of this shape. And we can change the size to something like 425, and then move it down to the same position of -350. And now we have 3 bars. And this obviously needs to match however many you have in your spreadsheet. And let's set it to 5, and you can scale it up even more. Now for this, we obviously also want the bottom line, so we need to change it to something like 1060. And now we're ready to actually add a spreadsheet layer. Now to do this, we can go ahead and go into this plus menu you can see in the middle here, the add menu, and then search for spreadsheet. Now adding this won't really do much, but first we can try to organize this a bit by collecting everything inside of the duplicator that relates to it, and then selecting the spreadsheet. Now if you look into the spreadsheet, we need to have some file. And for this example, I've created a really simple Google Sheets document featuring some numbers ranging from 1500 to 6700, and it's really just whatever you want. And then I've downloaded it either to Excel or CSV. For this, I used CSV, and then just dragged it in. Now, when imported into Cavalry, you can hover over it to see the values, which is going to be useful later. So we can select the spreadsheet layer we added earlier, and then drag in our spreadsheet into this file. And from this, we now have imported our data, but we haven't connected it to this rectangle height. So the way we do this is we're going to select the rectangle and then drag this blue dot from our spreadsheet layer into the H value. And right now it looks weird, but if we scroll out, we can see that they actually worked, but they're just way too big. So to fix this, we can go into our spreadsheet layer again, and then we could do something called remapping. And for this, we can use the number range version, which is gonna take the values of the source and change them into whatever you want. So for example, for this, we need the minimum value, which is 1500, and then the maximum value is 6700. And then for the minimum and maximum value is what we're gonna remap these values to. So let's say we want the smallest one to be 200, and the largest one must go over the minimum value, since else it's gonna look inaccurate. And for this, it's really just personal preference, but for this project I landed on a value of around 650 for the max and 150 for the minimum value. And now we're ready for the last step, which is animating it, since when pressing play, we can see nothing happens. But this animation is quite accessible to any Cavalry beginner, since it only requires one set of keyframes. And to create this animation, we can go into the rectangle and see that the H value is already occupied by a connection to the spreadsheet, so we can't just change it. And the best way I've found to control these multiple values is by pressing Ctrl plus and then adding a value, which we can rename to controller, and we have 4 different values we can change, which really helps us create this animation quite simply. And the first thing we can do is go into the rectangle and then disconnect it from the spreadsheet. So now it reverts back to the original, but don't worry. Then we can connect the controller into the height value instead. And now you can see we can change the value and it will change the height of the bars. So in here we can connect this spreadsheet into the value of the controller. And the reason we're doing this is that we now have a strength value that we can use to animate this whole thing. And we also have a offset and time offset, which we can use to create a more interesting animation. So we can change the frame rate to 60 to make it more smooth. And then to create the base animation, we can set a keyframe at 100% at frame 100, and then change the strength to 0% at frame 0. And now we get this very boring animation, but it's quickly fixed by going to the graph editor and selecting all frames and then changing the magic easing to very slow in, very slow out. And this is fine by itself, but we can add a few adjustments to make it stand out. And the first is time offset, which by default is just going to delay the whole animation by the amount of frames we select. For example, if we set it to negative, it's going to delay the animation. Now, selecting this, it's going to delay all the bars. But if we go ahead and right click on this time offset and then add a behavior called stagger, and with this added to the time offset, we can make each bar on the graph appear one by one. And the way we do this is we can select the stagger, and the most important value to look at is the maximum value. Now, by changing this maximum value, you can see that by default, they all reach 100% at the same time. But if we go ahead and decrease the maximum value, you will see that each bar reveals itself one at a time. Now for this, I think it could look cooler if they went from left to right, so we can change the strength of the stagger to be minus 100% instead, and then do the exact same thing with the maximum value again, but instead have them be positive values. And now you can see it works from left to right. And for this, I think a more extreme stagger could be cool, so let's set the maximum value to 100, and now you can see each bar popping up by itself. And if you want to have some text be displayed at the bottom of your graph, you can add a text and then change the alignment and then add it to duplicator and basically copy all of the values from the original duplicator for the graph and then move it down below, and then right click on the string and add a string array, and here you can add January, February, and so on until you've added all your values. And this will yield a result that's more informational, but we can take it a step further by moving the words along the bar that they correspond to. And you can see moving this shape position, it moves all of the words. So before we get into actually animating it, we can move the duplicator a bit down. And now we need to find a way to move each of these words corresponding to their bar. And a way we can do that is go into the rectangle shape, and we can see we have this height right here. And we can try to plug this height into the duplicator of the text and then use the shape position Y. And now you can see that the text matches the graph's movement, but the text does look a little bit boring. So we can go into the base text shape, and then under blend mode we can set it to overlay, and then maybe darken the color a bit so it's a little bit more visible. And now looking at the composition again, we can see we get this nice result, but we could also take it a step further and actually display the numbers for each bar. And the way we do that is we take a look inside of the string array and realize that this won't really work for the numbers, so we can go into the text and then disconnect this connection, and then we can just delete the string array. Now, starting with the base text shape again, we can add a generator called value. And taking a look inside of this string generator, we can see that we have a couple of settings. Most importantly, we can lower the precision to 0, and then the padding can be set to 1. Now, trying to change the number, you'll see that the number also changes on the graph. So we want to have this number be controlled by the controller. And we can do that by dragging the blue dot into the number. And now you'll see that we have these numbers ranging from 0 all the way up to 650. Now, those numbers aren't what corresponds to the spreadsheet actually. And a way to fix that is first of all to take a look at the remapping we did of the graph in the beginning by taking a look at the spreadsheet layer we have right here. We can see that we have a minimum value of 150 and a maximum value of 650. And it makes it easier if you just match them by the source maximum divided by 10. So it's 1500 is 150 and 6700 is 670. So going into the string generator again, we can now then just multiply it by 10. And now we will actually get the right numbers that corresponds to the spreadsheet we had in the beginning. And if you would like to support me and the channel, you can buy me a coffee, links in the description. Thank you for watching.